else? We have a lot of time here. I have put this picture here in order to show Brian, you can take pictures yourself and come out kind of nice. This is really broken. Okay, so next time you just take a picture. It'll be just fun. Okay, so I have a random assortment of puzzles. There's a game that I used to play when I grew up called Jones in the Fast Lane. Does anyone play this? We used to just call it Jones. You get to play these characters, one of either two men, two women, and you get to do stuff in life, and then you have to get a job, and you have to have some fun, and you have to progress in life, in education, and in job, and career, and all that stuff, and kind of had a pun on this of life in the fun lane instead of the fast lane, because that's how I tend to think of my life and how I try to live them. I have a lot of the slides have been translated. Thank you very much to Dirk. Very, very much. So I hope that this will be also helpful for people who have a hard time with English. I have a hard time with German, so it will be helpful for me. So I'll start. I think here it's a good moment, right? Or this, whatever. Each person has its own language, their own language. I'm Sawyer, and I work at a company called Booking.com. I work there as a senior developer and a team lead and a trainer and a bunch of other stuff. And we do a lot of things, and everyone knows us, but some of my talk will actually relate to things that I've learned here, working at this company. So I'm going to start way far back. I got into the community from Tel Aviv PM in Israel. We have Israel PM, which is all of the groups together. It's organized by Gabel Salo. And we have several smaller groups. They're all about 30 minutes away from each other, so for us, very far. And there's Tel Aviv PM, Haifa PM, Rehovot PM, Jerusalem PM. I've been to, I think, all of them. I want to say all of them, but I can't be sure. And Tel Aviv PM is where I spent most of my time. And at some point after it died out, I started reorganizing it. It was a lot of fun. And after some time, I moved to Amsterdam. And Amsterdam has a Dutch group called the Amsterdam PM, Perl language group, and it's all in Dutch, so I don't really understand it. Super friendly people, super awesome people, but there's a large portion of people in the Netherlands that actually don't speak Dutch at all. It's a very cosmopolitan country, and Amsterdam specifically, I think it's over 25% non-Dutch residents, so it's pretty crazy. And a lot of the programmers work at Booking or works some other place, and Booking, I think, for example, I think it's over 80–85% non-Dutch in IT, so kind of crazy. So we formed another group, Amsterdam XPM. It's not for Sawyer X, it's for expats, which doesn't actually start with X, starts with E, but expats is a much more prominent character. And now we have two groups, Amsterdam PM and Amsterdam XPM, so you can attend twice as many meetings. Although I will say the Amsterdam PM is much more consistent in its meetings, so every month, and it's at a restaurant, so you get a good dinner as well. All right. And I work a lot on Dancer. Specifically, I work a lot on Dancer 2. I'm the maintainer, the project lead. Nowadays, we have other people doing the releases. We have other people doing development, which is fantastic because less Sawyer is better. But I tend to spend a lot of my time on this. I really like this project, mainly for the community that we created around it. I'm now the Pumpkin, so I get to work on another community, which is a lot of fun. In short, I really, really like communities. And I work in a lot of them. Some of them are in Perl. Most of them are in Perl. But I'm also active in communities outside of Perl. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got here. And of course, the simple answer is like airplane. But what I actually mean to say is that how do you get to working on communities? How do you get to work on the stuff that I work on? And Generally, I suggested a few talks for here, and unfortunately, this one was picked because it's not really a proper talk. And the reason it's not a proper talk is that a talk should have a story. If you've seen Brian's talk, he had a very good story. He had an entire historical belonging. It was very interesting, and it had a beginning, it had an end, he talked about other stuff. I don't have that. I'm sorry to say, I don't actually have a story for you. What I do have is a collection of small stories. And to me, those stories put together provide the way that I think of things in the sense of life in the fun lane. Of our lives are basically a collection of stories and anecdotes that are achieved by just playing with things that are fun. And I hope you find it interesting. And if you don't, submit a pull request. Okay, so a little bit of history. A little bit of history about me. I started programming with CGI PM. I didn't start programming with CGI, but the web programming I started with was CGI PM. It's pretty cool. And after that, I moved on to Catalyst. I really, really like Catalyst. It's awesome, and it's very. It might seem verbose, but it's actually very well thought of and very well structured. At some point, I had to move a website that was written in CGI, and it was so small that I felt it would kind of be. It would be too much to move it to Catalyst. Catalyst is fairly large, and we joke that Catalyst takes half of CPAN, Padre takes the other half. And I just wanted to find something much smaller. So I did the right thing, I went to CPAN and I searched for stuff. I found a really, really slick, cool web framework. The only problem with the framework that I found is that all the templating code was actually in the data section. Not everyone knows what the data section is, so I'm going to explain, and I hope you can see this. Can you? Is it good? Yeah. Fantastic, because I can't change it. Okay, so, excellent. So, if you take a look at this, we have a while here, and we read from the data section, and this is a handle directly to the section over here, and we can iterate over these lines, right? So we can use each one, and what I saw is that the template was actually done in the data section, and when they had to render, they rendered from the data section. So obviously, I picked a different one, which was this. So I actually saw, I was like, okay, no data section for me. I picked Dancer instead, which actually looked, from what I could tell, it looked exactly the same, but it didn't use a data section. I was like, okay, that's good. And the reason that I decided this is actually from PHP. I think PHP taught us a lesson. It taught us more lessons than it intended to. It still teaches us lessons, but it taught us one very, very important lesson. And PHP kicked ass because of it. So if we take a look at how we print HTML, this is how we used to create websites. We just print content with HTML directly in it, and HTML is like its own kind of language, a markup, and then we just wrote it as a string, and we could have all those typos. And then we said, oh, we can totally make this better. We'll just make functions out of everything. So now the HTML becomes a function, and the head becomes a function, and the body becomes a function. We just mix them together and combine them, and it's awesome. And it's still silly. It's still wrong. So PHP came in and said, we can do better. What we can do is flip upside down and basically have content, HTML, with functions in them that call the actual code that we want in between. We interweave the code inside the markup instead of code that generates markup. It's really, really cool. It's very smart. Unfortunately, we realized that these are actually two different job descriptions. They're two different jobs, they're two different careers, they're two different paths in life. Because when you get heavy into HTML and CSS and JavaScript, this is a job. Now JavaScript is a job in and of itself. And it used to be that the program would create everything because there were only like, I don't know, 5 HTML elements. Like, it was simple. But now we have more, and we have CSS. So these are different jobs. So we can't do this because now we're mixing them together. So PHP obviously went the correct path and said, well, let's open a tag in order to call a function in order to run a template elsewhere. Which is kind of funny because now PHP is basically, you start the interpreter reads an HTML file, the HTML file reads PHP code, there's only one tag, the tag is to run PHP code that will then load an HTML file that is actually a template in PHP. Ta-da! Okay.
Tadaka.
Right. It's a doctor of languages. Okay. So this is why I don't like the data section, because it kind of mixes those things up. And you have this render template, and they did something smart. They'll say, we have a small title here, and then I'll be able to align it against a section in the data section, which is, it's bright. I will say, this is not the only way to do it. This is just the example that I saw, but it made me think of PHP. And I think it's a very important lesson to learn of how sometimes we think that we can just flip it upside down and things will make a lot of sense, when in fact, sometimes it gets into another level of complexity, and then we paint ourselves in a corner, and now that's how all PHP code is. It's all HTML that opens a tab to PHP that actually opens another file and so on. So yeah, I went with the answer. That's not the reason I kept with the answer. The reason I kept with the answer is the community. I want to talk about the first interaction that I had with the community and with the people working on it. I tried to write my program, my website. It was CGI. I had to move to Dancer, but it was still hosted on CGI on shared hosting that didn't support anything other than CGI. So I couldn't run it, and I did what obviously you should do, is blog and complain. And I wrote a blog post that basically said, the syntax is so pretty, but I can't use it because I'm working in a CGI environment. So I'm stuck, and I really wish I could use it, and I can't. And then I did the next best thing, what we always do, go and have hummus. In Israel, you have a lot of these places, you just go, you sit down, you have a bowl of hummus, eat the bread, whatever you want. And I was sitting with my partner at the time, we're eating hummus, and I'm Googling it up on my phone to see, can I find anyone who maybe tried to do this and can shed some light on how to do this. And I came across a blog post. And the blog post said, Sawyer was trying to do this thing, and he couldn't. This is how you do it. And I was so surprised. I was surprised for several reasons. First, someone spotted that blog post from earlier that day and wrote a response to it. Two, they explained how to do it, and it is possible, it's fairly simple. I was not familiar with PSGI, and Dancer supported PSGI from an early version, so that means you can run in a million things. And the third is that the author, I looked it up, is the guy who wrote it, Alexis Sucrier, who we call Sucria. And he wrote it, so it was like, wow, oh my god, he saw it and he fixed it, that's amazing. But the last thing is that he actually was not a jerk about it. Because it's very easy to respond with, he's spreading misinformation and he's making you look bad and blah blah blah. But instead it was like, he tried, he wasn't able to, it is possible and this is how you do it. It was very friendly and I was really, really excited about this. See, the internet, there's a problem with this. Blog posts allow us to be jerks. They're really, really good at allowing us to be jerks. The internet as a whole. I mean, Sucria could have been a jerk, but he decided to be helpful and to be supportive instead. And I think it was a very good decision. The problem is that if you take a normal person and you give them anonymity, and then you give them an audience, you can actually achieve a jerk transformation. There's a very good display. This is from Penny Arcade, who had done a lot of bad things, but this is a really, really good comment that Penny Arcade did. Basically saying, if you take a normal person and you add the ability to be anonymous, you give them a platform, an audience, they become dicks. Like, it's a problem. And we suffer from this. I think it's not necessarily anonymity, audience, but it's also the combination of distance. You know, George Carlin, who's a very prolific comedian that I really, really like, who was also very political, and he said that when someone's really far away from you, he's a really big asshole. When someone's really close to you, like, he becomes a bigger one the farther away he is from you. Because you allow yourself to have that distance to become angrier and more indignant. And this, I think, also relates to it because the internet gives us this distance. And the audience here doesn't have to be an audience, it's a platform. It's a soapbox, you can stand up and you can yell and scream and how you're smart and everyone else is stupid. So, okay. So how did we get to this? And by we, I don't actually mean just me, I mean all of us. Like how we get to this room and how we get to do what we do. I'd like to think that it's because of fun. I focus a lot on fun. I think that that is a very good driving force behind so many things that we do. And I give a talk called Enjoying What We Do. It's a keynote, and I actually feel bad about a lot of things I said there, but I do feel good about some things that I want to cover again, just because I think it's a good intro to what I'm trying to say. When I grew up, WinNuke came out. Who has used WinNuke? Really?
You're
Wow.
getting old, man.
Is it just too early, or is it too old? Like, did they come out too old for you? Like, I wasn't using computers anymore at that point. WinNuke was basically using a problem with Windows 95, and you would just give someone's address, you could give a message, and it's like, bam, done, operating system's gone. And I wrote an implementation of it at school, and we basically, computer classes were basically everyone nuking each other. We didn't study shit. It was great. NetBus came out, and it had a bunch of functions. It was the first really successful Trojan horse program. We of course used the CD-ROM open because it was amazing. It was awesome. 100.3% of the time with a 0.3 margin of error. There is a rumor at my school that a few kids actually broke into school in order to play Diablo because they didn't have good network at home. So I don't know who these kids are. If you want to know more stuff, ask me later. I studied assembly. At first assembly, it looks like this. It's very weird. You kind of get this feeling of, I don't know what this is, but then it becomes structured. And when it becomes structured, you can disassemble other programs. If you disassemble other programs, you realize all the machine instructions. You can say, you know what, actually, instead of doing a jump here to a piece of code that says, you can't use this program, I'm going to say, don't jump there. And suddenly, I can use this program. Or jump if the password doesn't match, and then suddenly I can use it. Or you're supposed to go to the internet and check whether I have the license. No, you don't. There's an operation that says, no, you don't. It's a hell. And you start playing with programs, and then you start, basically cracking as many programs as you can. It's just fantastic. I sat down for a long, long time just cracking different programs. Programs I didn't even use. I remember one that was just like a bunch of paste bins. It was just silly. Cubase, though, is a very interesting example of this because Cubase, the cracked version, at some later version of Cubase, had to disable a ton of checks. Apparently Cubase had done so many checks throughout the cycle of your usage of it that it hindered all the cracking attempts. It took a lot of time for them to crack it. But eventually it cracked it by disabling almost all of them. It was an immense effort. But afterwards, it ran faster. Like, way faster. It ran so fast that people who bought Cubase downloaded the cracked version and used that one. Because they needed to use the program. This is where I grew up. I actually grew up in a small suburb of this, and I moved here when I was 18, and or earlier, and I was raised there and grew up to become, I don't know, a bit older. And this is Tel Aviv, this is a shoreline. It's a very, very dense area, very, very dense. This is a long time ago, it's much more dense now. And it's very hard to find a place to live here. The prices, I mean, Amsterdam is nothing compared to this. Berlin is nothing compared to this. I have a friend in Munich who said, oh, it's so expensive here. No, it isn't. Sorry. And there are websites where you can go and you can find the different stuff that you want in the different apartments, and you can look at the listings, and it's free, and you can go and you can call and you can come over and all that stuff. But people sit on that all day long, and you can't check out stuff that was like last week, because people will, that day that it's published, will go see the apartments and sometimes sign on the spot, which is crazy. I wrote one of my first Perl scripts with actually a script that would scan this website, scrape it, get all the listings, filter them according to stuff that I wanted, and would email me, and I would call as soon as I saw the email, sometimes 10 or 20 seconds after someone pressed the submit for publishing, which scared the fuck out of me. It was awesome. So I talked in that keynote about all the puzzles that we do. We do a lot of puzzles. We play with a lot of things. It's a lot of fun. These are challenges that we have. And we have a lot of fun with them. It's very joyous, joyful. I don't know the proper conjugation of that word in English. So, okay, moving back to what I do. I do a lot of open source. I do a lot of free software. It helps me play with those things, and it helps me work with all these different challenges with different people. And there's several things that I've learned from doing open source, from doing free software there, I would like to share. And these are kind of, I'm hopefully etching towards lessons that I've learned and maybe even finish the talk, but who knows. So first thing I learned, you have to be kind to users. Okay, and being kind to users actually helps you get their help. It means that you're able to get assistance. It means that your project gets more attention. It means that it becomes better. And I mean, if you're Sukriya, for example, it helps It can help you get other people to take over your project when you don't have time, maybe even twice, because that's what happened with Dancer and with Dancer 2. I didn't write it, he wrote both of them. I took over each one when he didn't have time anymore. Error messages, I think, are very, very important. I've learned this. I would like to give you an example of why error messages are so important. Has anyone ever encountered this error message?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. This is not a Perl error message, this is a PHP error message. It says פעמיים נקודתיים, obviously. You thought German was hard. And while I don't speak German, I do speak Hebrew, so I can explain this. And I'd like to tell you what this actually means. Because it is not documented. If you look this up, it will say when you find it and what caused it. But it doesn't actually say what those words mean. So let's start analyzing them. First, pa'am. Pa'am in Hebrew means once. Something that happened a single time. Pa'am. Okay? Then we have the ayin postfix, which actually means more than once, several times. It's specifically for twice. Okay? So something that happened once, twice. Happened twice. Then, nekudatayim actually starts with the word nekuda. Nekuda means period, a dot, which you see underneath. But nekudatayim, with the extension of ayin, just like palm, turns into two dots at the same time. What are two dots at the same time? Two periods at the same time. How do you do it?
A colon.
A colon. That's what it means. Nekudatayim effectively means a colon. There you go. You now know Hebrew. Excellent. Wow, you're good. Okay, so let's start analyzing this. Two of a colon means double colon. Double colon is the namespace separator in PHP and in Perl and 5, 6. And this is the error that you get when you write some kind of PHP code that has a namespace error. Obviously. It's very clear. This is because Zend, the developer who worked on this, much like most of Zend, is actually Israeli, and then he just put in the I guess maybe a Lexer error, I'm not sure, of basically saying, well, obviously this is a double colon error. Yeah, okay. It's on the list of things that I apologize for when people hear them from Israel. Okay. I've learned that you have to be thoughtful. You have to be thoughtful. Software is written by humans for humans. It's very, very important to remember. Always consider that. You have to be flexible. When we talk about different ways to write something, singletons, object-oriented, functional, procedural, all these things, when you tell a C developer, well, you know, C is not object-oriented, they usually just laugh it off, because if you have a context, usually a struct, and you send it to a function, the function gets information from the struct, returns information to the struct, surprise, it's object-oriented. Why? Because object-oriented is a pattern. Even if the language does not have it embedded in the syntax, it is just a pattern. It's a way to do something. You can do the same in any one of these ways. They're all patterns at the end of the day. So pick one that fits you and be flexible in moving between them. At the same time, be accepting. Understand that some people will have their patterns. And it's okay, because it's just a pattern. They achieve the same task. And it's very important to remember this. I was looking up some open source free software projects with my brother who wanted to work on them. And we found something that said, oh, well, you know, this is MVC, that's silly. MVVM supersedes MVC, like it kicks its ass. And like, I didn't even know what it was, I had to look it up, and to me it didn't make much sense, but to someone it did. But to that someone, it made so much sense that everything else is stupid. Which is not true, because multiple things can happen at the same time. For some people, a model view model, which I don't fully understand, to be honest. Whenever I look at it, it doesn't make sense to me. To someone, it does make sense, and that's a valid way to solve it. For other people, is MVC. The answer itself, when people ask us, we always say, it's MVC-ish. Which means that you can do MVC with it, but it doesn't force you to do MVC. So you kind of pick the way you want to do it. So we have to be accepting of different ways to do stuff, which is always bad to Toady, more than one way to do it. Sometimes there are different solutions that are clearly different. One could be wrong because it doesn't make use of certain features or abilities that are important, but sometimes it isn't. Some changes, some differences in programs are actually memory optimizations or CPU optimizations where they're not necessary. And if a different one fits in your head more, that makes more sense. There are several examples that I've seen on Perl 6. When we go roll Perl 6 and someone said, well, you know, the load time of this is just horrendous. Yeah, but it doesn't matter for that program. Like, it runs for 3 hours. Who cares how long it took it to start up? Like 2 seconds, 3 seconds, who cares? And it's the same when we had the Moose thing, like, oh, you're a command line, it's with Moose. Sure, but it runs for like 7 hours. It's a really long cron script. Like, why does it matter to you if I took 0.3 more seconds to load up? Like, who cares? Does it matter in this context? No, then it doesn't matter. One thing that we have a big problem with in IT, and in people in general, but in IT specifically, it's a bunch of privileged dicks, but we have a problem with humility. People are not humble, and it's very, very important to be humble. There are 3 specific definitions that we get confused. One is how much knowledge we think we have. 2 is how much knowledge we think there is. Some of it we don't have. And the 3 is how much we actually know. And these are 3 different things. One is what we know, one is our perception of what there is to know, and one is our perception of what we know. There's a really beautiful graph. I like it very, very much. It's hard to see it. It doesn't matter because it displays those 3 parts. The blue line at the bottom, I have a thingy here. The blue line at the bottom basically says, this is how much I actually know. And the more you actually know, the more you realize there is to know that you don't necessarily know yet. And slowly, your perception here of, oh, I think I know so much, it goes down. Because you realize, I don't actually know so much. Because I realize there is so much more to know. And this allows you to be humble. It's very, very hard to work with someone in any capacity that doesn't think they have more to learn. And it's something that I know I sometimes see when interviewing. In any company that I worked at, I had people who interviewed, and whenever I give them a problem, and then I would ask them to try and find problems in their solutions, and I don't expect them to do everything right. I actually assume they will make some mistakes because I do too. But once in a while, I will come across someone who says, there are no problems here. Really? No? No, it's perfect. Okay. So yeah, just try to think of this. Like, we learn how much we have to learn, and we know with time how much we actually don't know, which is very interesting. Cooperation. I've learned that cooperation is very, very important. This was a Ukrainian developer. This is when the revolution, the whole mess in the Ukraine started. Someone opened a ticket for the framework and said, I have this problem, here's a bug. And he wrote, I will take a look much later, much later, because I'm Ukrainian and we have a revolution right now. Sorry. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it. He actually apologized. It's amazing. And there was like a long thread of like, dude, take your time. It's fine. It's okay. Okay. Do the thing. So people confuse this all the time. People think that cooperation means that we agree. No, it doesn't. Cooperation means that we communicate and that we work together. We don't have to agree on it, but being able to communicate is very important. In Dancer, we have a rule where when someone makes a decision, me, Sukya, doesn't matter who, and we make a decision that lasts, you can always go back to it and say, no, I want to understand why, or I still disagree, and we can always open the subject again for discussion. It doesn't mean we'll agree, it doesn't mean you get your way, but it's always open for discussion, because that's what cooperation actually means. I've learned that technology is confusing. I want to give you a pop quiz to illustrate this. This is a fairly simple code that provides one route, get method, slash, and we'll run a piece of code. We call params, which is a keyword in Dancer, to get foo. My question to you is, what is foo? If we have a curl request, question mark, foo equals bar, we send foo, the value is bar, obviously it's bar, right? We agree? Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Let's make it a bit more complicated. What if we have 2? This line has 2 foo with 2 different values. What's foo now? Well, this will change depending on the framework that you work with, and almost all of them will get them wrong. Actually, whichever framework gave you bar, got it wrong. The answer does this too. It gets it wrong. So, you usually get this because someone actually provided 2 values. So now you have to represent 2 values. And if you want to represent it with a container of 1 value, then how do you do it? Well, whatever value you give has to be different in structure than the original value. If the original value was a simple string, you now have to represent more than 1 string in 1 variable, so it probably will pick a reference to multiple values. Okay, so we get our error. The right way to actually fix this is to say, whatever I got, check if it's a reference. If it's an array reference, then normalize it to get the last one. It could be the first one. In Perl, hashes win, so in hashes in Perl, the last one wins, so we can say last one is kind of a convention. And this allows you to normalize everything. If you don't put this in all of your code is likely to be buggy in one way or the other. Let's make it more interesting. Technology is very interesting. So we have a post here, and we have, this is a placeholder variable. Basically you're saying, I want to have something here that will refer to as food. And when I go back, I want to say, give me food. I want you to give me this thing that I've marked as food. And then we ask for params food. So what is food? Let's start. First we have /bar. So it's slash and a word. That word we have tagged as food for us. So when we get it, it's going to be bar. That's good. And then we have this. And in this case, we're actually sending a query parameter. And this query parameter is also somewhere in params. It's also named food. Which is it now? The one that matched or the one that was provided? That's not good enough. Let's add to this another one. And now we have two foods. What is it now? Not just which one, but also how is it represented? Let's take it one more step. We also provide a data packet that has a key and value, and according to HTTP spec, these are now keys and values in your parameters. That's how you send them. And which one is it now? Okay, so we can fix this, and new versions of the answer actually have this, answer 2. First of all, this is an old feature that almost no one used. Params can take an argument, and the argument says, what is the source of this? So the source of this is route. I want a parameter from the route match. There's also query, there's also body. But okay, we can fix it further because we still have to fix like how many we got, right? So we can do this by changing this to route parameters. And then it has a method get. Route parameters get will always get one value specifically from the route match of the spec. You also have query parameters, and you also have body parameters. So, for the query parameters, we can also use getAll. GetAll actually says, I always want multiples. Always. If someone sends 0, it'll be empty. If someone sends 1, it'll be 1. If someone sends 10, it'll be 10. But it will always be an array. Always. And the get will always return single. Even if someone provides multiple, it returns the last one, and we have the route parameter, the query parameter, and the body parameter. So okay, so now you can use those instead. Pretty cool. Okay, we can go a bit crazier with technology. Just to explain a little bit how complicated it can get. I'm going to explain this thing. So, we have a timer and we have a count. We create a get, route, and answer. We return a delayed response. The delayed response is actually a callback that allows you to encapsulate the current state of the request and then be able to reinstantiate it with the DSL. It's pretty complicated. Basically, it says I want to return something asynchronously. And you call flush. If I recall correctly, and I'm not sure, and maybe I should update these slides, I think the delay can replace that sub at the beginning. Anyway, we call flush. And flush basically says, as soon as this actually gets run, flush all the headers to the user, which means that now you can stream things. Not just asynchronous, but stream them. The difference is that asynchronous means it can happen sometime in sometime in the future, in the background. Streaming actually means I give you something, you send it that moment. Okay? So it's non-buffering. And then we can create a timer with any event timer, which means start now. Every second I want to run this piece of code, and the delay said this is a sub, but a sub that has all the keywords in the answer. First content, and content every time you call it in async, it sends content across the wire. It is asynchronous and it is streaming. Pretty cool. And of course we check our counter. Once we hit 0, we'll call done. And done is a keyword that basically says close the connection with the user. That's it. Which means that now you can do a ton of stuff. The user is not connected anymore. You can clean up, you can log, you can create files, you can delete files, you can move things around. Whatever you want to do that is heavy or would take longer, you can do it now. The user is cut off and they can go on their merry way. Of course, we will undiff the timer because anyway requires it. So, this is a very tricky technology in Perl 5 that I really like called the context, the temp stack. There are a lot of ways to define variables in Perl. My, our, there's also state, and there's local. How many people here use local? Tricky, right? Local is a very, very tricky thing. What it actually does is take a global variable and make it lexical, which is awesome. But it means that within that scope, anyone who accesses that global variable will have your lexicalized value. So we actually use this. When you call delayed, it creates an object in the background that you don't know about. It's a dancer2 corresponds delayed object. And it stores, amongst other things, the current request. And it uses a global for that current request. That global, interestingly enough, is undef until a request comes in, and then it's localized for that request to have the current request. And of course, it saves a callback, which is actually the code that you wrote. So it stores the state and what you want to do in an object. Then later on, when you need to call it, it reinstantiates the request to what it has and calls your callback. And that's how your callback actually has the state, even though it went through the cleanup phase of the answer, so it doesn't exist anymore. Now, this is hard. It took me a long time to explain fully how that works, and I don't have all that time. I can tell you one thing, though. Documentation is way harder. Way, way harder than all of this. We always document according to what we know as implementers. Well, obviously, this puts in here, and then you move this here, and to a user, this is unhelpful at all. And that's why people who write documentation should not be the people who wrote the code. It should be the people using the code, because they need to explain how they actually use the code and how it should be and can be used. So we get documentation wrong all the time. Moving on. So yeah, I wrote that I work at Booking. I've learned a lot of stuff from working in Booking. It's a really big company, but it works like a small company, very small teams. So a little bit about the company so you get some background on what kind of stuff we do and what kind of things I could learn there. We do a ton of Perl, a ton. Almost everything is in Perl. We have a little bit of Java, some Go, C, Ruby, Python, wherever we need it, etc., etc. Some statistics about the company. So you understand kind of the scale that we're talking about. We have over 1 million properties in over 224 countries, over 42 supported languages, or sorry, 42 exactly. It's a lot of locale issues. Right now, we're past 1,100,000 rooms reserved every day. We have over 103 million reviews that people have written and that we verified. Takes a lot of work. Over 13,000 people work at the company. I do believe we're over 1,200 in IT. This might be 1,000, but for some reason I'm thinking 1,200. I think 1,200. A lot are actually Perl developers, some are not, but the majority are. We have over 9 of the Perl 5 developers actually working at the company, so some of the top 5 or top 10 of the core devs actually work at the company, which leads to very interesting conversations. And of course, we surpassed that over a year ago, but over 10 million metrics in any given minute. Okay, so stuff that I've learned about technology from working at this company. First, I learned that you work in iterations, a lot of iterations. In dancer2, if you check out the feature branches, all of our feature branches, every single commit doesn't break the build. None of it breaks. When you work on a feature, it does not break. And we try to make those feature branches actually fairly small, so we can build on that. And we do that a lot at the company. Changes come in very, very quickly. I've learned that progress is actually the set of improvements over time. So you make small improvements. It takes a while. The end of it is basically what we consider progress. Progress takes time and it takes small iterations and small improvements, and that's okay. This is one of the things that is really, really hard for people who join the company. People think, I've written this, it's amazing, it shouldn't ever be changed, it's fantastic, that's it, it's done. And then a month later, we have to rewrite it. Because the scale is really hard, the machines hit the load from the machines hit the code, and the code doesn't always match. So we learned that implementations can actually be temporary. You're going to have to let go. You have to say, I wrote this, and maybe in a year it will all be scrapped away. And maybe it was really good code, but it will have to be scrapped away. So it's temporary, let go, or write it in a way that you could replace parts of it. Problems at scale are the scale. People think that, oh, it's clearly if you just use that different other language I read about on Hacker News, everything will be fine. But for us, in almost every single situation, the language was totally fine. We have pieces that someone came in, wrote it in Go and said, look at how fast Go is. And then we took the Perl version, trimmed the infrastructure from it to be as slim as the Go version. It was as fast or more. Why? Because usually the language is not the problem for us. The scale is the problem, and it has to do with architecture, how you architecture code. It's very, very important. Tooling, invest in the right tools, automate, make it easier to use, make it easier to find problems, make it easier to fix. Accommodate making mistakes. Making mistakes is fine. Make it something that you do. Make it something things that you want to do in order to learn, in order to roll back from. A few things I learned about people. You have to be yourself. It doesn't mean you need to be a dick, but it means you shouldn't hide yourself. You shouldn't be what other people think you should be, because that won't be you, it won't work. We have a saying at the company that our diversity gives us strength. It's very important to us. We work with people from over 50 different countries, 50 different nationalities at the company. There are a multitude of languages, and some of these people speak like 7 or more languages. It's crazy. But this diversity is actually very, very powerful, because different people give you different aspects, different views, different considerations. And your programs get much smarter, much faster, much brighter and powerful. Inclusiveness, being able to create an environment where all these people can come in, making each person an equal member, it promotes creativity and it promotes cooperation. It's very, very important to us. It's critical at the company. And because we all come from different nationalities, imagine when I met, the first person I met from abroad, when I grew up, the first thing that came to my mind is, where are they from? Okay, what can I associate that country with? And we do this often. But because everyone comes from a different country, these are a lot of histories to take into account. And at some point you're like, screw it. This person is just the person who's from that country. And it helps you put into perspective the person themselves and not where they're from. And it's very, very crucial, because we all come from places, and all the places that we come from have a rich history. A lot of it is terrible, okay? I'm sorry to say, this country, my country, a lot of these countries have terrible histories, and we have to evaluate the person on where they are and not where they're from. And that's something I had to learn, because I did it wrong. Some stuff that I learned from being alive, I really am at the end of this, and I swear. Don't be a jerk. The proper translation in German is idiot, but idiot is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for specifically this sort of behavior. If there's one thing I can tell people, there is zero value in hurting someone's feelings. You earned nothing. So when you say this is stupid, you're not helping. When you say you're stupid, you're not helping. And you're not earning anything, okay? Keeping technical is not a real thing. I hate when people say it, because when people say it, usually it's people who are not technical. It's people who are emotional and people who are jerks. And what they want to say is, I don't want your emotions to get in the way of my emotions. So I'm just going to say keep it technical to make you feel bad for having emotional responses to something that I say which is clearly emotional. So it's not a real thing. Like, offending someone's gender, sexuality, intelligence, skill, it's not technical. A degree in computer science does not mean a degree in humanity. Just because you have a degree doesn't make you smart. Just because you know things doesn't mean you're a good person. It doesn't mean you can cooperate. It doesn't mean you can think of solutions. Okay? So never evaluate people strictly by the level of knowledge they've gained, or the level of information they've achieved, or the level of certificates they have. Okay? Lastly, if I can end with a note on what it's like for me to live in the fun lane and what guides me, there are 2 principles. They're fairly simple. Do good, and don't just do good, try to be good. Try to be a good person. Try to create a family, a community, a place where you work and you breathe and you operate. Create a place where you can create. Create a place where you can smile, where you can actually have fun. And that's it. I'd like to thank you very, very much. English, German, and even in Hebrew. Thank you.